Hey everybody, Neil Thompson from Teach the Geek here. I work with technical professionals so they can present more effectively, especially in front of non-technical audiences. And you can learn more about that at teachthegeek.com. Again, that's teachthegeek.com. I want to talk about podcast guesting and why, as a technical person, you should look into doing it. When it comes to being a guest on other people's podcasts, it's a great opportunity to practice speaking, but not just speaking, it's speaking extemporaneously, because in most instances, you won't know the questions beforehand unless the host provides the questions beforehand. But I would suggest not going that route. Actually go into it not knowing the questions beforehand. So when you ask the questions, you're answering them in real time. The more you do this, the better you'll get at it, because even when you're in a situation at work where you're asked a question and you didn't prepare for that question, now at least by doing these podcast guest spots, you'll become a lot more comfortable answering those questions at work. It's a very just being a guest on a podcast is a very low pressure way to practice this skill. Perhaps now you want to know about how you can actually be a podcast guest. Well, you can go to listennotes.com. Well, you probably know how to spell listen and notes. It's the two words together. And then you'll search for whatever topic you want to speak on. And then a list of podcasts will pop up. And you're gonna look through those podcasts, make sure that they take guests, and make sure they've put out an episode recently. You certainly don't want to reach out to a defunct podcast. Once you've figured out that they do take guests and they also have recent episodes that are up, you want to reach out to the host, tell them about the topic you want to speak on, ask them if that topic would be of interest to their audience. You may have to follow up a few times in the event that you don't get a response back from the podcast host from their initial email. But once you do and they agree to have you as a podcast guest, well, now you just have to wait. Then you get on the podcast and they'll ask you the questions. You'll answer them to the best of your ability. In many instances, you could probably ask this ahead of time. The there will be some editing of the podcast as well. And in that case, well, you could always go back and even re-answer questions if at all possible. But I would actually just stick with the answers that you give. And then afterwards, once the podcast comes out, you can always push it out to your membership. Well, not your membership, to the people that you're connected to your network. That's always a bonus for the podcast host. You can always ask that podcast host if there are other podcasts that they would recommend you being a guest on based on your topic of expertise, and hopefully they'll have some answers for you. And then you'll basically do the same thing. Reach out to those podcast hosts to ask whether you could be a guest on their podcast to talk about your topic of expertise. And as I mentioned, it's a great way to really practice speaking extemporaneously, answering questions that you weren't prepared for. And when you give those presentations at work, when you're not confronted, when you're asked questions at work that you didn't prepare for, well, now you at least have some practice in dealing with that situation because you've been a guest on podcast. It works out really well. So just to recap, to become a guest on a podcast, go to listennotes.com, key in the topic of your topic of expertise, go through the list of podcasts that come up, making sure that they accept guests and that they have recently uploaded episodes. Reach out to the podcast hosts to gauge whether your topic of interest would be of interest to their audience. You may have to follow up a few times to get a response. And once you do the podcast and then push it out to your network to help the podcast host out with getting more people or getting more eyeballs or I guess ears on their podcast. Hopefully this has been helpful. Again, my name is Neil Thompson. I'm the founder of Teach the Geek. I work with technical professionals so they present more effectively, especially in front of non-technical audiences. And you can learn more about that at teachthegeek.com. Again, that's teachthegeek.com. Until next time, take care and stay safe.